time differently. Thank you, Tushar, for that confirmation. I'm assuming everybody is accepting this request to record the session so that we can have a bigger outreach for people who are unable to attend, especially for our folks in Australia, Chirag. So with that, once again, welcome everyone. It's great to be back on this knowledge series. We are hoping that we are trying to dent on some bit of our own lack of information, misinformation around issues that are emerging with the new age emerging technologies. And with that, I will also like to welcome Chirag for the session. Chirag Joshi, who he perhaps needs no introduction, but he's one of the best and leading voices on cybersecurity. And I think what I like the most about him is how he kind of simplifies it and demystifies it for common people who are perhaps not as technology informed or technology savvy. And that really works for me, Chirag, personally, because, as lawyers, we need to deal with technology every day and we perhaps can't ignore it and avoid it any longer. But the way you simply put it across really makes all the difference for us. And I know you've been doing a lot of good work with the top leaderships that you are currently engaged and associated with, both in India and Australia. So you bring in a lot of that, knowledge and expertise and real life challenges that also is something that, really I find very valuable. I'm hoping all the, audience here will also find useful. And so welcome, Chirag. A very good evening to you. I know this is evening for you in Australia. And with that, I will also want to just kind of set out the agenda. I know we basically spoke about data prevention and data privacy in the first one, and what cybersecurity frameworks and measures we can put. We thought we will take it to a more interesting topic, which I think all of you would be aware of, which is guarding privacy in the age of deepfakes, and deepfakes we've all heard about. So with that, pretty much our agenda is very specific to kind of look at privacy and cybersecurity in the age of deepfakes, and also look at some bit of the governance, regulatory policy views, both nationally to the extent that they exist, and obviously internationally, because there's a lot of good work happening in the US, UK, Singapore, and there are certain fundamental indicative guidelines and frameworks emerging from what everybody there in those technology evolved jurisdictions are looking at. So thank you, Chirag. Welcome. I will start with a very simple question, which I think people will have an answer to, but just so that to hear from you and add to that perspective. So what exactly is a deep fake and how do we create it?
Hey, thank you, Shruti, first of all, for the kind introduction, and a big hello to everyone who's joined us now and also who will watch this on demand later. It's a pleasure being here, and I know we try to demystify all these topics around cybersecurity, but fundamentally, it still impacts us as human beings, right? That's where all of this starts. Is it can get lost in the shuffle of IT assets and corporate assets and data and whatnot, which is all important, don't get me wrong, but I mean fundamentally it's still that human aspect that is such a core part of cybersecurity and technology in general. So to your question, deepfakes, there are lots of technical definitions people can look up, and they tend to be paragraphs long, but we'll keep it simple, right? It's essentially using artificial intelligence to create highly realistic but obviously fake likeness of a person, which means their audio, their voice, their video, or their photo, right? I mean, it's the likeness of an individual which is being faked through artificial intelligence. And this is not new, right? Like the idea of us using Photoshop is now, I don't know how many decades long. And before that, people, always use things to enhance features and make, funny or interesting articles. The fact that AI now has, reached to the evolution it has, and it keeps increasing every day, but that has allowed now highly realistic things to come about, and I think that's where the difference is. The other one is the widespread availability of tools that allow you to do that. So I think that's where the consumerization of AI has been such a big factor in deepfakes being so widely available. These days, I know people can look up so many applications online, on their phones, just a simple search, and they'll get many, many applications to create deepfakes. Now there are some sophisticated ones being used as well, which some have legitimate, good purposes, right? Which we are in creativity. If you're using it for your own amusement or you're using it for research, that's fine, right? That's where these things are helpful. But the problem is we are seeing them now, weaponized essentially in a wide range of activities. So you mentioned cybersecurity. And recently, there are so many scams that we could talk about. But there was one very unique one, which I encourage our audience to look up, and happy to share links when we release this video online as well, which happened in Hong Kong, where essentially a finance worker was scammed out of approximately $39 million Australian dollars. And that happened. It started with a phishing email, right? It started with a phishing email in the first instance. So again, the human factor, that good old phishing that comes up, But after that, that individual essentially joined a call, unlike, not unlike the ones we are on right now. And they essentially created a deep fake of the CFO and other organizational members. And it all seemed like it was a regular meeting. And this person was asked to transfer this amount of money. And this person did. Obviously, it turned out to be an elaborate scam. The sheer volume of it in terms of, the size of the prize, massive. How they went about doing it, with a phishing email, not super sophisticated. Deepfake, probably. But this is where we are starting to see that in the cybersecurity world, lots of scams, lots of voice scams as well, which is not a surprise to people these days. A lot of, voice impersonation, which is so hard, especially if you're taking action. And then you start to see the aspects of deepfakes that are beyond cybersecurity, right? That go beyond scamming people or compromising their access credentials. Most cybersecurity breaches still start with, access, right? That you give away your password or you give away your login credentials. That's how most things still start. And you click on things you shouldn't. That remains. But you now also have this issue of, on the other side, the privacy aspect. And obviously, a lot of prominent actors in India and globally have suffered that, where, it's quite distressing when your image, where your likeness is used in a compromising position or used in a way which really you feel highly uncomfortable, and then that gets widespread so much on social media and the internet these days. So that's a problem. The other one, though, is the more serious nature, and we should perhaps talk about this one as well, is the misinformation. And this has become a big problem everywhere, where, especially for democracies and elections, where, these are used to either malign candidates, spread false propaganda, because you can use the likeness, right? You can use a president's voice or a prime minister's voice or their likeness, be it at elections, especially contested, highly polarized elections, which sadly now are most democracies where you see a lot of polarization on both sides. That's where it becomes problematic, where it goes beyond just scamming people and actually affects societies and civilizations. So lots of issues, but we can dive a bit deeper into them.
No, and very, very helpful, Chirag, because you covered three dimensions. One is pretty much misinformation at the corporate level, where you're looking at huge losses to the organizations, cut to, misinformation and cloning of our personal data and information records obviously for the use of financial losses. Third, when not importantly, being reputation loss, which, you had, the Indian film actors, like you mentioned, to what we saw with President Joe Biden and Giorgia Meloni as well, in terms of what kind of their voices being used. And it's pretty pertinent for for us here in India, because we have an ensuing, one of the largest democracies going to elections, and we have our general elections coming up. So yes, the threat and the risk is real, and therefore, the photo editing and the video editing skills have gone way more technical than what we started to originally do it, like you said, with Photoshop, etc. So, so now let me get into the next question for you, Chirag. So clearly, what are the emerging challenges regarding privacy and cybersecurity due to the proliferation of AI and deepfakes in India? And I'm looking more at India, and now we've covered some bits, as to what are those areas. But if we were to tone it down to some more specifics around it, that will kind of make the concern and the awareness a little more real, I would say.
Yeah. Look, I mean, so there are quite a few with. So I mentioned an example of that finance worker, right? There are so many other examples that we can talk about. But if you think about you mentioned some with President Joe Biden and the Italian Prime Minister, and by the way, some others as well. Where actually they went about with robocalls, right, and asking people to not vote in primary elections, which is a very specific thing. So, and even India, as far as I know, and you can validate some of it, is in assembly elections in India. I believe in Madhya Pradesh too, that they actually had these kind of instances come about where they had these messages and they had this propaganda type videos, obviously targeting certain politicians. So you've seen that with certain Indian actors too, like you mentioned, where they were put forward. So there are those things. But moving beyond that, I think getting more specific to some of the examples that we see, right? And now I'm talking about deep fakes as a means of social engineering, as a means of making you do things you don't want to do. You've seen a massive spike in the scams concerning those. And those are now, in fact, to the extent that people are now challenging, we need to move beyond passwords much faster than we did in the past, because they are going after those access credentials to the point I mentioned. In fact, here in Australia, it's over $3 billion as far as my numbers go, and I can validate that and send some links when it comes to scams, right? That is faced by the country. Now, a lot of these scams do happen because of the traditional vectors. And now deepfake has the potential to make it a lot worse, right? And those which, and again, bring up, people talk about voice as, as one aspect, but it's the primary aspect still. It's harder to decipher that than it's in some cases other means. So that continues to persist. Look at what is happening, and this will give you a bit of an appreciation for the scale of the problem, where and we'll talk more generally about AI, right? We're talking deepfakes, a very specific subset. We'll talk about other problems too. But look what's happened here in Australia with our e-safety commissioner, where we have, an office dedicated to safety of citizens online. And this happened before AI became such a big deal. And key things that these folks focus on is image-based abuse, which is, utilizing and weaponizing images. And perhaps, private images that people share in relationships and now are being weaponized for things like revenge porn and even things like child impacts, which is obviously a lot more heinous in nature. So this office was created. Now what they're trying to do is having a mechanism by which to educate the public on how to spot them, but then working with prominent social media organizations to take down things as they were found very quickly. And that's the hardest thing, because these things spread so fast. And that's why I'm looking at different aspects which make it real to people, right? And this is not theory anymore. We mentioned all these examples, but the safety aspect. People put pictures of their kids online all the time, right? Sharing them on social media. Now, sadly, these come about and hurt us in those areas. And while law enforcement, while authorities like e-safety commissioner here, and I'm sure organizations similar in India will try to take these, and approach them, it still takes too long, and it will take long because it's hard to kind of react to them. So now there is the aspect which is being propagated is safety by design, is you design these systems with safety in mind. But until all of that occurs, and that will take a lot of time, I think these challenges are pressing and real. So I think that's where the focus is. I will also talk about, once we come to that section, is let's talk about AI more broadly, right? Beyond deep fakes, as to the AI attacks that are actually hurting us in real time now, and no theory. It's actually hurting us now. If you talk to most cybersecurity leaders in organizations, CISOs, chief information security officers, they're seeing a big spike in these type of activities, and that activity is now. Imagine this, right? If you are somebody looking to make money of people and scamming them, phishing emails were something that were used. How did this happen? For the most part, it was by looking up, sending information to large stocks. Like that was just the traditional one where you just were numbers game. You send it to a lot of people, some people will fall for it. But the spear phishing or the more focused ones came about where you looked up somebody online, looked up the organization they worked in, knew a bit about who their manager was, and then crafted emails such that they could, be picked on much easy, right? Or you look them on social media, compromise their credentials, and then use their account to send it to your friends and family. Right? That's how it happened. Now, AI allows this to be much faster, where there are essentially fully autonomous systems that can do that. Right? They can scrape pretty quickly. They can create these tailored messages and flick that across, which means we already are facing a lot of these things, and now they're spiked up much more than before, become a lot more sophisticated. And what we used to train people, and sadly, we still train people on those things we trained them 15 years back, right? Or 10 years back, is look at the URL and look at, if it sounds too good to be true, look at the English mistakes. Well, a lot of them are now changing. Like these are beautifully written emails, perfectly written emails, no English grammatical errors.
Thanks to
HTTPS, where
ChatGPT.
we're talking to people. Yeah, thanks to ChatGPT, right? Another area. And they can happen at scale. So that's where you start to see that problem, compounded. But on the other hand, it's become easier than ever before using the same technology that generates deepfakes to create malicious code. So in the past, you had to be, some level of expert or spend some money on the dark web to buy toolkits to launch these attacks. Now that's become much faster for you to create some of these things sitting in your basement, with very little except a laptop and access to some of these, which is in some cases free, right? So that's where the challenge is, right? It's compounded by all these factors, and which is why we need to take a different tack to it. And I know you will talk about some laws and regulations that are coming to rescue, but again, law will play catch up in this because of such a fast moving pace we find ourselves in.
No, and then very pertinent. I think, Chirag, what you've done is you've pointed out two very fundamental things that are now needed, or perhaps are also the challenge. So, I think the day of privacy by design from a tech perspective is already at least finding some acceptance as a concept, as in theory, and therefore through all the tech standards that keep coming by, from an India perspective, ISO 27701, say, for example, that takes care of some of the fundamental aspects where you have the nuts and bolts of privacy by design being thought about, adhered to by, aware organizations and technology-labeled organizations, of course, the technology organizations. But safety by design, like you said, is a culture that is so needed. But like you said, it's a lot. It's a process in the making, so to speak. And
it's and to your point there, right? So, and I'll talk about some of it, and maybe because AI forced us, like how COVID forced digital transformation across the patch, right?
Yes.
That major trigger made things happen so much faster. Maybe this was the major trigger now that'll make some of these things go faster. We've been talking about safety by design for a while as a voluntary concept.
Yes.
Now maybe it's so pressing that it'll actually start to happen pretty quickly.
And it's best that we start sooner than later, because otherwise there's chaos waiting to happen unless it's already happening right now, like we see. And then the second one that you spoke about is, consumerization. A non-tech person like me, with some AI tech help, I could perhaps claim to quote something very dangerous and use it for my own benefit, etc. So the consumerization of technology, which is what generative AI pretty much has brought to the fore. But the good thing is it's made it easy and usable and accessible, but you put it into irresponsible hands, and that's where we are seeing all the noise that that we are having to deal with, and all the consequences, actually, not just the noise, so to speak.
Yeah,
You were saying something, Chirag.
it's an opportunity, right? I mean, it's look, we're talking about the risks, and but we talked about this before. Is it's a generational opportunity for us, for our businesses, for our societies to actually harness the power of this collective intelligence that we all have bringing together. So there's an opportunity there, but it's about the security aspect, which is and privacy, and the legal aspect, which is such a key to harnessing this securely. And to your point there, I do find now organizations are asking this question increasingly, right? And you probably see this as well, Shruti, is they all have a business strategy. So I tend to work with senior executives and boards a fair bit in terms of their cyber aspects, right? And my question always to them, and we talked about this in our last video, which I encourage people to check out, is it starts with the business, it starts with your technology strategy, business strategy, because that's how security and other things come about. You don't start with security first. But a lot of people are thinking we want to do AI. We need to adopt AI, but they haven't really figured out the use cases. And when we go into those areas, I think that's where such an important thing for executives and leaders across to set up responsible programs for the inception, that they start to account for these risks that are coming to reputation, their financials, even law. Because currently, even just in Australia, there are 4 or 5 different reporting timelines that come when you face with a security incident, anywhere between 48 hours to 30 days. You could be dealing with all different timelines for reporting security incidents. So that's what the reality of the ground is for these people, right? And then you compound that with some of these other challenges. And unless you prepared from them at the start and not made this an esoteric, interesting thing out there where you chuckle at something, or you find, oh, there's a scam here, a scam there. It's actually really, really much more important than that for it to be designed in good security governance or good organizational governance upfront.
No, and you're very right. And to your point on law always playing catch up, so specifically for India, our current legislative framework is a little dated, to be honest. With the IT Act and the IT rules that currently deal with technology per se, and haven't yet been reformulated to deal with new age technologies and emerging technologies. We do have something in the pipeline called the Digital India Act, but that is, I'm hoping that we will see some bit of we'll have some visibility on it post the general elections, like we speak right now, Chirag. And I think what that does is that we currently not only are playing catch up with the law, but also on the redressal spaces around it, because technically then that tends to make our addressing it more reactive than proactive, because there are the technology, the governance laws are not so much there. But that said, I think the opportunity, Chirag, not only for us as a country to educate ourselves from whatever is happening around the globe with UK, US, and Singapore, as we spoke, it's also fundamentally there would be some bit of value in trying to see if we can have a broader based AI basic principles of legislation, because clearly the problem clearly is transnational, Chirag. It's boundaryless. However much we create boundaries, but truly, this particular technology has broken all boundaries. So if we had fundamental AI principles and governance frameworks in place that could look at creating the policy and the regulations and regulatory frameworks, and we could perhaps tweak it to our own prioritization of that as countries. But I think that perhaps is a very valid need of the hour, so that the efforts across the geography is more collaborative rather than duplicative, insofar as dealing with the technology is concerned.
And you're so correct right there. It's because you start to see even organizational and in countries, we talk about organizational risk appetite for risk. Look at the countries, right? Where UK is taking more of a cautious approach, and you see EU's come out there and being a bit more aggressive about this in terms of defining high critical system and the requirements that come about, how they need to be monitored. So I encourage folks to look at that. It'd be very interesting to see how India settles into that picture. Australia is taking a similar approach, is a bit more cautious approach, where we're not going out very aggressively. Yeah, it's not as if like it happened with GDPR. right? GDPR was such a strong, privacy-related regulation regime that came about, but Australia didn't have something similar. So it took us a while to get there, and we cautiously did that, right? Like, so some countries will go faster, some will go slower. But to your point, especially the size of Indian economy, just sheer volume of what we see in India, it'll be very interesting to see how the Indian government approaches this.
Absolutely. I think that's a good segue into our next question as to, okay, the problem is real, the problem is here to stay, and we need to evolve and make some, remedial measures for, from a reaction perspective, and some cautionary measures from a proactive perspective that we need to put in place. But to your point, Chirag, what technical and organizational measures do you think we can take as organizations and as perhaps countries? I'm going to take away that boundary we are creating there to mitigate the risk that is associated with, AI. And now that we have the topic called deepfakes, so you may perhaps give us some insight into that as well. But yeah, I'm more aligned to making it more generic and across AI versus just deepfakes.
Yeah. Look, there are a few different things. So let's talk about organizational or the non-technical aspects, right? Let's bundle them as non-technically what we can do. So we've established the need to approach this with a sound governance, so it's accounted for in policies. What does it mean to securely use this, right? What is your organization's policy on allowing your people to leverage some of the commodity or publicly available things like ChatGPT, Gemini, and others, right? What is the policy position there? Because it starts with setting that expectations early, like how we had acceptable uses of IT forever, right? Those policies. What is acceptable use? Where do you draw the boundaries? Do you allow it to be used for creating public statements and media statements and public content, or do you also let people post confidential stuff, which I highly discourage you to do, because these are public models at the end of the day, unless you create one for yourself. The other aspect is the organizational risk appetite. Like we said, it all starts with those things in mind, is how far do you go with some of the restrictions that you put on. But then awareness will always be our key ally. Awareness across organizations, across nations. And this goes back to the human critical thinking, which we will always need, regardless of how technology evolves to protect us, even more so than ever now. We used to teach people to verify things out of band. Now, again, our capacity to absorb information, to react, is limited, right? We don't have unlimited resources to look at every single thing and scrutinize it to the nth degree. So what the recommendation then is, if you have to take an action, right? So sending money, giving away anything sensitive, those type of things should obviously raise alarm flags, and you should look and expect something. Is this person really capable of doing this, saying this, right? Or sending me this request, verifying that out of band. That means picking up the phone and talking to them separately besides the voicemail you got or an email or a video message you got. That's one. The other thing is training our citizens, our people, before they start, sharing things on WhatsApp or any other social media or messaging networks and propagating this, asking themselves if this could really be true, right? Which is actually where critical thinking comes in. Just because I don't like a politician or their policies, does it mean that they're capable of doing what this video says that they're going to do? It's a tough thing, right? As opposed to, us just being in echo chambers and talking to people we agree with. So these things will require us to have that critical thinking and validate before, because we are part of the problem if we start sharing this on, right? And if we put a clamp to that, if we report it to, if you see it on Facebook, you can report it there. You see it on Instagram or whatever channel, report it to those platforms and mark it as abuse so they can action it quickly. So things like that are going to be really helpful. And in our organizations, that means reporting this to our security teams, right? So that is a non-technical nature of things we can do. On a more, technical perspective, there are some tools out there which are encouragingly quite good at detecting deepfakes, by the way. So Intel's been, putting their tool out. Microsoft's been talking about Video Authenticator. There are some other players in this space like Sentinel, who are creating now tools where people can go and actually validate that, and organizations can deploy them. So again, I don't necessarily recommend any vendor. People can do their own research, but there's a lot of good innovation coming out there in the marketplace on this area, and you will see that innovation go about, because this is the problem. Like we solved to an extent extent of spam and phishing, we did solve that problem to a degree. Despite all the things we negatively talk about with phishing, we actually stop a lot more spam emails than we ever did in the past. So that's a big win as far as I see. Like always, there are challenges, but it's a big win. We'll find something similar there, and we are doing it. But I always tell people when you think about AI, think of three parts to the problem, right? If you're an organization deploying AI, the first part of it is the data, right? There's no AI is not magic. It relies on data, large amounts of data. And if you're creating something for your organization, it starts with protecting that data, right? You may have collected that data for a purpose of a specific business problem, right? Customer invoices, health records. But if you're putting them in this large data store now to train models, well, you may have to think about your data security a bit differently because the nature and the confidentiality increase so much more now because there's a vast volume there and different levels. The other thing is a model that you use. Most people don't go about building their own models, right? Most people use open models that are available to create these things. Securing that model is really important. So what are the attacks? Data poisoning. Somebody actually poisoning the data that you rely on to make decisions. The second one is adversarial inputs. So you send messages to AI that are, you are trying to get information out of it that it's not supposed to give you, right? It's not programmed to give you, but you're smart in how you do it, right? So that's where people find creative ways. In fact, you can look up where, you can share some links of how people have tried to bypass ChatGPT's controls to make it give information it shouldn't be giving. And so that's the other aspect. And the third one is what is now referred to as prompt injection and is referred to as, if you have publicly available AI models available, is the denial of service. Is you create so many, questions and queries that you can actually filter a lot of data out there. Now, again, I remind people, AI is not magic. It sits on servers, infrastructure, networks, all the stuff that IT systems run on. These are very, scalable systems, but they're still IT systems, technology systems. So all the old rules still apply, right? You still need to have your hygiene with your patching, your access controls, your encryption. You need all of that stuff. Because somewhere in the magic of AI, these things get forgotten. And when I'm advising organizations on building good security postures, I still talk about these things as being the primary cases, where if you have poor password management practices or poor privileged access, I don't care how good your AI model is, you're going to leak out a lot of information than you should. And you perhaps have a risk of model theft, where you can spend all this money building out a model, and your competitor or somebody interested can reverse engineer your model and use that at a fraction of the price. And that's another big risk. So these are the different aspects of the policy, the procedures, the architectural aspects that people need to account for when they think of securing their AI products and against AI attacks.
It's very, very helpful, and I really like what you kind of created in the end, Chirag. The old rules still apply. It's not, AI has not come about in thin air, doesn't exist in thin air. It forms the basis of all the technology, all the pre-existing legacy technology, if you were to call it that. And it sits on them and rides on the shoulders of them. So why do you have to be aware of the newer challenges and the newer peculiarities that you need to kind of be keeping in existence as you deal with it? You can't forget the old and the functionalities of the old, because that's where it finds its gaps and navigates its way through, so to speak. And therefore, to your point, that awareness and reporting. Awareness, be aware. If you're seeing something, doesn't look seemingly, so carrying on, Chirag. So essentially, awareness and being using our own common sense as to, does it sound right? I know I don't like the person, but does it actually sound right? And then at least proactively reporting it to whichever intermediary you're, receiving that information from, because clearly in India, the current legislation lays a large onus on the intermediaries and the tech intermediaries on the reporting and the pulling down and all of that, the necessary actions that we need to take. Now, if we were to look at it from the three dimensions that, the guidelines and the frameworks that are emerging. So like we discussed briefly, Chirag, the EU AI Act tends to be more cautious, more preventive. The onus is on the developers itself to put in place the technology safeguards, the detection algorithms, and the watermarking, etc., of where what is what tool or information is dependent on artificial intelligence that they may have used in the processing or the production or the use of it. Come down to, say, Singapore and the strategy and the governance framework that they are putting. They are more accountability driven, so to speak. There is a lot more accountability on the control levels of each stakeholder who's contributed to the to the production of a particular product, service, process, or tool, whichever way you look at it. So yes, it's mandatory that you kind of place onus on whoever has contributed, and what controls do they have on tweaking it or revising it, etc. Now, I can see that NASSCOM and our own AI guidelines that we have put in place essentially looks at a combination of the two. There is preventive there, but the way they have kind of brought the whole thing together is that the researchers and the developers need to have a more collaborative approach in how they are devising it and designing it, so that that coordination brings about the challenges is also the improvements that you need to know. Interestingly, NASSCOM also puts some onus on users. If you are tweaking on the product that you're using, or using it for areas that you are not expected to use it for, or issues, then you are also liable. Not only for your own personal impact that it has, but it's also the impact on the tech or the service provider whose technology you were tweaking with, so to speak. So these are some fundamental governance frameworks. I wouldn't call them, at least from an India perspective, there are more guidelines and governance frameworks that are emerging. So it's also good to keep that in mind in terms of what the lay of the future laws could look like and what are they thinking on those aspects, etc. And if you look at it largely, as I see it, from what the globally exists and what we are thinking of here in India, clearly the division is pretty clear. At one end, you are putting technology in place for detection of whatever can go wrong. You are putting secure communication channels in place. You're putting in practices like regular cybersecurity audits. You're also going to need an incident response strategy, so to speak. So at an organizational level, those could be some of the actions that you need to take. But at a human resource level, you have a bunch of things, like you said, awareness, training programs, and also thereafter, putting in place communication policies, which kind of leads into your reporting requirements, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of work out there as we speak that organizations and countries in their legislative frameworks need to put into place. I'm going to switch a little bit of the gear right now. I think we are short of time, are we? We are short of time, but don't want to. Maybe this topic we could look at as a segue into the next conversation, Chirag, and broadening it and calling over our fellow stakeholders who need to be devising these strategies and implementing it. So maybe a short 2 minutes on that from you, and then we can have a few questions and answers. I know there's been a request for that.
No, so, I think that sounds. Sorry, go, Shruti.
No, go ahead. That sounds good, Chirag, for you.
Yeah, it sounds good. I think we can take some questions. And to your point, yes, I completely agree. I think today we've tackled a fair bit of ground, starting with deepfakes, but also then evolving it to different measures that we can take as organizations. But yeah, we can now talk about in the next chat, expanding upon if you are an organizational leader or a CISO or a CIO or even a business executive or a board director, things that you should consider. We talked about some of that, but we can perhaps talk in a bit more detail about the different aspects that we touched on, including crisis communication and incident response, because again, that doesn't go away, right? In fact, the need to do it goes a bit faster.
No, absolutely. Why don't we do that? And in the interest of time, we could then link it to the currently existing and the evolving regulatory framework and the laws around the globe. And we could, in each of those things, we could perhaps make it more real and say, here's the challenge that you need to think of, and here's how people are thinking of it, kind of a conversation. So I think that could be a good way of segueing into our next conversation. I know there was a question or someone requesting for a question. We are now open for questions. Could you please write in or, come on video and ask your question? That'll be even more better. Yeah, Shubhangi.
Hi, Shruti. Hi, Chirag. Thank you for the lovely conversation. Little bit of background. I'm a cybersecurity professional who currently works into the audit space, and I take care of AI risk and LLM risk and altogether every risk which cyber pertains to. My question to you is from the cyber LLM awareness perspective. A lot of organizations, including my organization, has integrated ChatGPT, which is an open AI, into our infrastructure. And what we are doing is we are asking back and forth questions and we're sharing information. Now, we all know that we should not share PII information to the LLM model, and also don't wholeheartedly trust the results that are derived from there. But I just wanted to know, can we go a little deeper and uncheck what kind of LLM awareness should be brought into the organization so that they know what has to be done, and just not saying a simple blanket statement of, hey, don't share the PII information. So I wanted to know your perspective all around it. Yeah, thank you.
Rag, you'll take that. Obviously, LLMs sound like a master's degree in law to me, so you perhaps better placed for that.
No, thanks for the question, Shubhangi, and yes, large language models. Look, you brought up a good point, right? In the case of educating people on confidential information and the like. Now, where the awareness you're starting to see is defining internally for the organization. Now, you said you work in audit, so you obviously are marking it off a standard or a policy. I do think it's an important question to ask around the risk appetite the organization has for using these. To what extent do we plan on using this, and to what use cases? Now, when typically people integrate, OpenAI or any of the large language models, they're integrating it for operational productivity and for, largely making sense of all the different documentation that I have. So it's still largely into productivity and efficiencies, right? However, is it now there are use cases where it could actually be more product centric, more research centric, informing future strategy? So I always ask, with what was the use case that was foundational to establishing that relationship, and what is the risk appetite to go further? Now, in awareness, though, I think it's important to highlight some of the real risks that come about. Like, we all have heard about, the Samsung case where you had, the engineers put things they shouldn't have, and obviously you had a lot of sensitive information leaked out that way. There are other examples as well, which now become quite prominent. So it's important to highlight the use cases as opposed to saying blanket statements. To your point, don't put personal information. However, you can try to put things that are, you can just change a few words, and that's what I say. If you have a higher risk appetite to do some of this, which a lot of organizations should consider probably, unless they work in defense or some high impact industries, critical infrastructure being some others, or medical. Actually, critical medical services, if you put them aside and look at the EU model, you don't need to be a lawyer to look at that. Like, I'm not a lawyer, I know Shruti, so Shruti will analyze it to a very different perspective than I would. I could look at that and look at how they carved out different risk ratings for systems, right? Now, I would pick that. I would look at that as, where do we fit in that risk rating? If we fit to the lower end or if it, well, let's put those use cases forward where you can actually use these things, where you don't put your company name, you don't put personal information, but you start to craft out good questions to ask that model to actually give you informed answers to your use cases. I think that is where you'll start to see a lot more value come out of it, is creating a risk model around it as opposed to educating people. So tell them the risk cases that are probably the higher end. And it's not just PII, by the way, right? It's your intellectual property. It's your reputation as well. So put them in. you can always change them and still ask the same question, right? If I want to figure out a recommendation to run a workshop, right? I don't need to put my company name in. I can put some recommendations. Now, training people on hallucinations, to your point, is obviously key. But who decides if it's hallucination or not? You need a certain level of subject matter expertise to use something. And that's where asking your people to bring in the right contacts in when they see an answer that they're not really sure of, because that gets often overlooked. We think that everybody can use this application and just run with it. But if you don't have, say, cybersecurity domain expertise, and if your AI model is hallucinating and is giving you advice that is just not relevant to securing AI, for example, right? And they're finding snippets which are not AI related but very general in nature, well, that's a problem. And it will slow down your processes. You'll come up with insufficient security recommendations forward. So this is where they need somebody perhaps like you who understands that and can actually add that overlay. So these are general purpose models. Remember that. And that's what I tell people. They were not designed for specific services. Now there are models emerging which are designed for legal advice, for medical, for cyber. And I think that's where I see the evolution, that you will see domain specific, which are actually highly trained on that data. ChatGPT is trained on every single type of data. So it has very general information, but we need something more specific. So I think those things will help you craft more tailored messaging programs as opposed to, to your point, just high level statements. Anything that you want to add, Shruti?
No, this is perfect, Chirag and Shubhangi. I hope we answered your question to the extent possible. We are happy to take forward, Chirag and I are happy to take forward your query if you need it further.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where, there are cybersecurity requirements, standards, different aspects that we can look at when it comes to specific use cases. Yeah. So happy to chat with you.
Did we have any further questions? Okay, I think this has been a very, I think we did make it a little more deeper this time as a conversation from last time, Chirag. And thank you as always for bringing out aspects that are not specifically being looked at and are very obvious and in our faces that we need to consider and evaluate and think through. So to the point, to all our audience here, we are going to come back very soon with the next session, which will be a segue from this session, and looking at it from specific aspects of what do you need to think, what people like Shubhangi and other senior leaders of an organization need to be thinking about, both from a cyber risk and security perspective when it comes to AI. And I will do my bit of kind of tying it in with the regulatory, the legal frameworks that currently exist across the globe and how are we thinking of it as India. So thank you very much and hope to see all of you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good to see you.